My true story, from Maine. I faked memory loss for 60 days. My children rushed to put me in a nursing home, but they didn't know I had $3 million 0 cents in my own bank account. They planned my exit. I rewrote their inheritance. She's slipping. If we play this right, we could have her house listed by July. I was standing in the kitchen, hand around a warm teacup, when I heard my daughter's voice through the thin crack of the dining room door. I had just finished steeping the Earl Grey the way I always liked it, 2 sugars, no cream, and was reaching for the honey when the words landed like frost across my spine. She's more valuable drooling in a chair than living in this house. That was my son. His voice dry and measured, like he was reading off a spreadsheet. He used to be a kind boy, used to bring me dandelions in paper cups and tell me he wanted to marry someone just like me. That boy was gone. And then, as if that were not enough, came the final blow. She's just a burden in pearls. Sell the house before she forgets she even owns it. I did not move. My hand did not shake. I stared down into my tea like it might offer some other version of reality. A version where I had not just overheard my own children plotting my removal like I was an old chair taking up space. They kept talking, their voices lowered now, as if suddenly aware that I might be closer than they realized. I turned slowly, set the teacup down in the sink, rinsed it under warm water, and dried it with the towel embroidered with my initials, J.A. or Jane Armitage. I had sewn those letters myself 40 years ago, when the house was new and full of laughter. I did not confront them. I did not scream. I did not accuse or demand or beg. Instead, I began to forget. It started small. At breakfast, I called my son by his father's name. He looked up sharply but said nothing. At lunch, I asked what year it was. At dinner, I poured salt into my tea and acted surprised. "Oh dear," I said, frowning at the cup. "I could have sworn that was sugar." I let my hands shake a little more than usual. I asked where my keys were, even though they were in my coat pocket. I told the same story about their childhood dog 3 times in one day. They noticed, and they started to document. I found a small notepad on the kitchen counter one evening, labeled Mom Incidents. It was filled with bullet points in my daughter's tight, clinical handwriting. Forgot birthday, repeated story X3, confused, stove dials, burned toast again. Asked if Dad was still alive. They did not share it with me, of course. I found it while wiping crumbs they never cleaned. I read every line, memorized them. I wanted to make sure I gave them a believable show. The cameras came next. I noticed one behind the curtain rod in the living room, another discreetly tucked into the bookshelf in the hallway. The most insulting was in my bedroom, hidden inside a tissue box. They wanted footage, proof, documentation. I smiled at the lens as I folded my laundry. I hummed lullabies while I forgot how to work the remote control. I stumbled once, just once, and clutched the doorway like my balance had given out. They never asked if I was okay. They just looked relieved. The days blurred into one another. I sat quietly at meals. I let them speak over me. I stopped offering to help with dinner or dishes. I let myself become a shadow in my own home, and through it all, they rehearsed their concern like lines in a play. "Mom's getting worse, I'm worried." She left the oven on again. "We have to do something before she hurts herself." And a pièce de résistance, delivered with tear-glossed eyes and falsely trembling voices. "It's for your safety, Mom." That was what they said the day they took me to the facility. Not a hospital, not even a home, a memory care residence, they called it. Soft colors, laminated brochures, smiling staff trained in kindness so polished it felt robotic. They had already packed a bag for me. Slippers, toiletries, one framed photo of the 3 of us from 20 years ago. My daughter held my hand in the car. My son drove, no music. When we arrived, I did not cry. I did not protest. I simply looked at the sign, Seaside Pines Elder Wellness Center, and whispered, "How lovely." They escorted me inside, gave a tour. I pretended not to follow. Showed me the activity room, the garden, the chapel. My room was small but clean, 1 window, 1 bed, 1 chair. I sat on the bed and smiled at the nurse. My son handed her a folder. "These are her forms. We filled them out just in case she can't remember details." The nurse looked at me gently. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Armitage?" I tilted my head and said, "Did you say your name was Margaret?" Her name was Kelly. She gave me a look that I had seen too many times, a mix of pity and pre-programmed reassurance. They left soon after. My daughter kissed my forehead. My son patted my shoulder. "We'll visit soon, they said. They did not look back as they walked down the hallway. The door closed behind them, and I was alone, but not lost, because I remembered everything, especially them. They say nursing homes smell like bleach and sadness. That is not quite right. It is a more complicated scent, medicated lotion, overcooked peas, and the faint but unmistakable tinge of waiting. Everything in that place felt like it was waiting for something to end. The first night, I lay on the thin mattress and listened to the building breathe. Air vents hummed. A television down the hall murmured something cheerful. No one was watching. And from somewhere near the east wing, someone moaned in their sleep, low and rhythmic, like a ghost trying to remember a song. I stared at the ceiling tiles and let my mind drift, not to dreams but to details. I counted the footsteps of the night nurse during her rounds. I memorized the timing of the automatic hallway lights. I learned the creak pattern of my own door, so I could open and close it without alerting staff. In the daytime I played the part. I asked what day it was, sometimes twice. I shuffled a little slower down the corridor. I forgot my lunch tray on Tuesdays, though I never skipped a meal in my life. The staff, young and sweet, would look at me with well-meaning eyes full of pity. "You are doing so well today, Jane," they would say. Or, "Let me help you with that, sweetheart." I always smiled. I always thanked them. I always let them think they were helping. But I was not confused. I was calculating. Every day I would sit in the activity room by the window and watch the birds. No one came to visit. I was not surprised. My children had already collected the only part of me they still considered useful, my absence. They needed me to be gone, and now I was. In their eyes, the job was done. I received one phone call, my daughter perfunctory. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. Everything okay?" "Yes, dear," I said. "I met someone named Margaret. She says I'm doing better." A pause. "That's great," she said, unconvincingly. "Well, we're swamped here. Let us know if you need anything." Then silence. She did not ask what I did that day. She did not ask what I remembered. I hung up gently and went back to watching the birds. The other residents were kind but tired. They had their own memories to manage, some slipping away like sand through fingers, others held tight in clenched fists. One woman named Ruth thought I was her sister. I let her hold my hand. One man named Walter cried during bingo because he could not remember his wife's face anymore. I cried with him, though not for the same reason. At night in the quiet, I remembered the years before. The mornings that started at 5 a.m., folding laundry at the hotel for minimum wage. The afternoons shelving books at the library, aching from hours on my feet. The nights spent embroidering initials into linens for a dry cleaner downtown, my fingers raw and blistered, all so they could go to good schools. So they could eat something other than boxed mac and cheese. So they could grow up never knowing the sound of a stomach growling through the night. My husband had died young. Heart attack on the factory floor. One moment a phone call, the next a funeral. I did not have time to fall apart. There was no space in grief for single mothers with toddlers. So I worked and I prayed. And I told myself it would all be worth it one day. And now? Now, I was sitting in a rented recliner, wearing socks with my name written in Sharpie, pretending I could not remember the alphabet, while my children sorted through my life like it was a storage unit. One morning, after a week of silence, my son showed up. He looked tired, maybe guilty. I could not tell any more. "Hi, Mom," he said, adjusting his collar. "You look well." "I had oatmeal," I replied, smiling. "Did you bring flowers?" He blinked. "No, but I wanted to talk to the nurse about your situation." "Which one?" I asked. "There are so many, I might be dying, you know." He forced a chuckle. "You are not dying, Mom. You are just not well." I nodded. "That's what they say, though I do remember your birthday now. October 12th, is that right?" He did not answer. Instead, he handed a folder to the nurse behind the counter. "Just some documents," he said. "Legal housekeeping." I saw the edge of a signature page sticking out. My name, scanned, forged. The handwriting was close, but not close enough. He had tried to copy the loops in my J, but he curved them wrong. The A in Armitage was always something only I got right, a habit from my mother's French heritage. The nurse glanced over the form, then looked at him. She needs to sign in person. Oh, she already did, he said smoothly. It is just for record keeping. The nurse hesitated. I spoke up. Is it Tuesday? I asked. The nurse turned to me. It's Thursday, Miss Jane. Oh dear, I said. I thought I already went to church today. My son gave a tight smile. See what I mean? He left 10 minutes later, folder tucked under his arm, his steps quicker on the way out than they were coming in. He did not know that the nurse behind the counter was not the only one listening. In the hallway behind us, just around the bend, was a visiting volunteer, 21, bright-eyed and curious. She had been shadowing staff all week, and her phone had been recording voice memos for her end-of-term report on elder care abuse prevention. She showed me the recording that night. Did you want me to delete it? She asked. I looked at her, and I smiled. No, I said. Save it somewhere safe. I may need it later. Because now I had proof, and all I had to do was wait. The thing about building a life from scratch is that no one claps for you while you're doing it. There is no applause for early mornings or scraped knuckles, no standing ovation for going without so someone else can have enough. But I remember every nail I hammered, every dollar I pinched, every time I patched the roof with borrowed tools and borrowed time. Because no one else was going to do it for me. I came to Maine with 2 children, 1 suitcase, and a car that coughed every time it hit second gear. My husband had been gone for 4 years by then, and the life we built together had slowly faded into one I had to carry alone. The rent was rising, the city too loud. So I followed a newspaper ad to a quieter town, cheaper rent, and a library job that paid less than minimum wage but came with peace. That library saved me. I started as a clerk, shelving books and checking out copies of Goodnight Moon and old Agatha Christie's. I stayed late to clean the floors and straighten the children's section. Within a year, they let me lead story time. Within 2, I was tutoring after school. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. At night, I taught English classes to immigrants at the local community center, families from Syria, Somalia, Vietnam. They reminded me why I worked so hard. Because survival is a language of its own, and I was fluent in it. Every dollar I made went into that house. It was a weathered Cape Cod-style fixer-upper on a cracked road with peeling shutters and a rusted mailbox. I loved it from the moment I saw it. The realtor called it a project. I called it home. I planted a garden first, tomatoes, zucchini, sunflowers that grew taller than my son. I painted the kitchen yellow and the bathroom blue. I learned to patch drywall and replace outlets. I bartered baked goods for handyman help. I replaced the windows one at a time, using a savings envelope labeled for warmth. One day, I bought bricks. Actual brick. I laid a path from the porch to the mailbox with my own hands, knees in the dirt, sunburned and smiling. The kids helped at first, but grew bored. I finished it myself. Every time I walked that path afterward, I felt steady, even when everything else was uncertain. That house raised my children. It kept us warm. It held our laughter. It caught our tears. It watched birthdays, heartbreaks, science fair failures, prom nights, and quiet dinners when no one had anything to say. And yet, years later, my oldest called me clumsy because I did not know how to close an app on my phone. Mom, seriously, it's a touchscreen, not a toaster. You're so old school, it's embarrassing. He said it with a laugh, but it stung anyway. I remember looking at the kitchen table where we used to eat ramen and pretend it was gourmet pasta. I remember how I used to leave the lights on so they would not be scared of the dark. How I used to lie awake counting coins under a blanket just to make sure we had enough for their school lunches. But now I was a joke, a relic, a woman who once moved mountains for them but could not keep up with a phone update. It only got worse from there. They stopped calling unless they needed something. They stopped visiting unless guilt drove them. And when they did come, it was all passive judgment masked as concern. Maybe we should get someone to mow the lawn. It's getting to be a lot for you. You still have that old wallpaper? Wow, vintage is really in. Have you ever thought of downsizing, Mom? Might be easier on everyone. They always smiled. They always made it sound helpful, but underneath the words was something sharp. Then came the worst of it. It had been about 5 weeks since I was sent to the facility. One of the aides, a sweet girl named Lena, came to me in a whisper. "Miss Jane, I wasn't supposed to say anything, but there's something you should see." She pulled up the video feed on her tablet, one of the cameras that had been installed in my home, supposedly for safety. But the system had auto-backdropped footage to the cloud, and Lena, doing IT support as a part-time job, had access through a clerical oversight. The audio was faint, but clear enough. My daughter-in-law, standing in the living room, arms folded, talking to my son. "She's not getting better," she said. "And frankly, if she dies in there, at least it'll look clean. No fingerprints on us." My son did not flinch. He did not yell. He did not disagree. He just nodded. "Then we need to move on the paperwork. If we're going to sell the house, we need the deed in our name legally." That was the moment something inside me burned. Not with rage, not with heartbreak, with clarity. They were not just planning for my decline, they were rooting for it. And suddenly, I knew exactly what to do. It had been almost 2 months since they put me in that place, enough time to collect their evidence, enough time to forget me, enough time for me to make a phone call. I waited until the hallway was quiet, mid-morning on a Tuesday. The staff were changing shifts, and the residents were occupied with their puzzles, naps, and soft, measured meals. I slipped into the small visitors' lounge, picked up the phone, and dialed from memory. It had been over 20 years, but I knew she would answer. "Marcy Thorne," came the voice on the other end, calm, clipped, precise. "Marcy," I said. "It's Jane Armitage." A pause, then a slow inhale. "Well, I'll be damned," she whispered. "I never thought I'd hear your voice again. Where are you?" "I need you," I said. "I need to bring everything back into my name." That was all she needed to hear. Marcy had been my lawyer since 1991. She helped me buy my first home after Henry died. She was the one who suggested I open a second bank account, quietly, separately, just in case. "Women like us," she'd said back then, "we don't always get to keep what we've earned. Best to keep a door locked only you have the key to." And I did. Every bonus, every tutoring check, every birthday card slipped with a 20. It all went into that account. Not a soul knew about it. Not my children, not my friends, just Marcy and me. And now? That account held $3,002,740.91. It was mine, and it would stay mine. Within 3 days, Marcy visited me at the care facility. Posing as a niece, of course, she wore sunglasses and a trench coat like she was stepping out of a spy film, and I nearly burst out laughing. "You always were dramatic," I whispered. "Call it appropriate paranoia," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. I handed her everything, the memory card with the recorded footage, the details of the forged paperwork, the video clip of my daughter-in-law's cold suggestion. She did not blink. "Do you want to sue?" "Yes." "Civil or criminal?" "Both." She smiled. We spent the next week quietly filing. We transferred the funds into a trust. We rewrote my will. My children were removed. Every niece, nephew, cousin who never called, erased. In their place, Seaside Pines. And Nurse Alicia, the only person who ever called me Mrs. Jane instead of room 302. She brought me ginger tea when I had a cough. She tucked in my blanket without asking. She read aloud to a blind resident every Thursday, even when it wasn't her shift. She made me feel like a woman again, not a ghost in waiting. I named her as my health proxy. I left her the cottage in Maine. The rest, the millions, the investments, the future, would go into a foundation for elder justice, for women like me, left behind and locked away. And then we filed the final motion, formal complaint for unlawful elder confinement, financial misrepresentation, and attempted inheritance fraud. Marcy sent it directly to the probate court and the district attorney. She also sent one more copy anonymously to the local news. Just a whisper. They would not know what hit them. It started with a whisper. A single article on the website of the local paper, buried beneath town hall disputes and high school sports scores. The headline was simple but sharp. Elderly woman fakes memory loss for 60 days to expose family's inheritance plot. By the time I finished reading it, it had already been shared 200 times. By noon, it was on the front page. They ran my picture, Not a recent one, but an old portrait from my library days. I looked younger, stronger, surrounded by books and light. The article didn't name my children directly, but it didn't need to. The facts were clear. An elderly woman in a Maine care facility, committed by her children under suspicion of cognitive decline, was found to be fully competent. She had secretly recorded their conversations, preserved her financial independence, and rewritten her will, cutting them out completely. The piece ended with a quote from an anonymous source close to the case. She played them at their own game, and she played it better. The phones began ringing that evening, not from my children, they were too busy reeling from subpoenas, but from neighbors, old friends, former colleagues. People who hadn't spoken to me in years called just to say they were proud, that they had always known I was sharper than I let on, that they wished they'd been braver when it mattered. One man I barely remembered from church sent a card with 3 words: "You did right." I received flowers from a woman I tutored in 1999, a letter from a college student studying elder abuse policy in Boston. Even the staff at Seaside Pines looked at me differently, not with pity, but with awe, as if I had become something more than a patient, as if I had become a symbol. And I suppose, for a moment, I did. The story spread fast. National outlets picked it up under headlines like, "Maine Grandmother Outsmarts Greedy Heirs with Secret $3.00 M Account." "Elder Justice in Action. Woman Fakes Dementia to Save Her Legacy." Some called me a hero. Some called me conniving. One anchor said I was a quiet revolution wrapped in a wool sweater. I liked that one. Of course, not everyone was pleased. My daughter posted a statement online claiming I had been manipulated by caretakers and that mental illness was being weaponized for sympathy. It didn't land well. The comments turned quickly, calling her out for hypocrisy, cruelty, greed. My son stayed silent, probably on the advice of a lawyer. A week later, a reporter from the Herald requested an interview. I declined the cameras, but I agreed to meet her in the garden behind Seaside Pines, where the sun was soft and the air still held the scent of pine. She was young, with a notepad and too many questions. "Did you really fake the memory loss for 2 whole months?" she asked. "Yes." "Why?" I looked at her over the rim of my teacup. "Because I needed them to show me who they were when they thought I was powerless." She wrote that down. Later, she asked what I would say to my family now, if I could say anything. I sipped my tea. "They planned my exit," I said quietly. "I rewrote their inheritance." She blinked. That's powerful. It's the truth." That was all I had left to say. I did not want revenge. I wanted restoration. And I had found it. In silence, in patience, in truth. The justice system would do what it must. The public would decide what to believe. My children would have to live with what they had done. But me? I was already free. Free in the way only someone who has been discarded and still stood tall can be. Free in a way that no amount of money, not even $3 million, could buy. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. It began with a resignation. My daughter had been working at a private school, expensive, competitive, the kind that prides itself on community values and carefully curated newsletters, the same place she used to brag about over brunches I was never invited to. An anonymous tip had been sent to the school board, a link to the article. A note attached that read, "How can someone who tried to institutionalize her mother for profit be trusted to guide children?" By the end of the week, she was asked to resign. Quietly. With dignity, of course. No public statement. But the parents knew. They always do. The calls stopped. The social invitations dried up. Even her oldest friends started backing away. She posted a vague message on social media, something about lies and manipulation. No names, but the damage was done. She moved back to an apartment in town, smaller, colder, not far from where I used to live, years ago, when I could only afford a place with shared laundry and thin walls. Meanwhile, my son's world crumbled more violently. His wife left him. That made the news too, though it was the local gossip columns, not the major papers. Neighbors said they saw her packing up the car with their little boy one Saturday morning, tears on her cheeks, fury in her stride. She left a note, though I did not read it myself, but I heard what it said. "I cannot raise a child beside a man who tried to destroy his own mother. She filed for divorce within the month. He tried to call me once, then twice. I did not answer. I heard from Marcy that he showed up to her office, begged to speak with me, asked if I had been coerced, if I was angry, if I still loved him. Marcy told him the truth. I was not angry. I was done. He wept in her office, the kind of crying that comes not from grief, but from fear. Fear of losing not just money, but image, legacy, the narrative he had written for himself as a devoted son with a difficult mother. That story was over. The real one had taken its place. I returned home the next week. Not to the house they tried to steal, no. I sold that, quietly, donated a portion of the proceeds to Seaside Pines, and used the rest to buy a cottage by the sea. It is not large, but it is mine. There is a porch that catches the morning sun and wind chimes that sing at dusk. I have roses now, chickens too, and a dog named Button who follows me like a shadow. I do not miss the noise. I do not miss the lies. One day, a letter arrived in the mail, from my daughter. I did not open it. A week later, another, from my son, unopened. I placed them both in a small box labeled, "What Was." Then I wrote a letter of my own, short, polite, sealed in cream-colored envelopes. Inside each one, I included a printout from my private account, recently updated. At the bottom of the page, under the transaction history, was the balance, $3,006,442.18. Underlined in my own handwriting, not yours. I mailed one to each of them. They never wrote again. And that silence was the first honest thing they had given me in years, because I had learned the hard way. Some people only return when they think something is left to take, but I had already given them everything once, and I would not do it again. I moved into the cottage in early spring, just as the ice began to pull back from the shore and the gulls returned to circle above the gray Atlantic. It was smaller than the house I had once called home, but it was the right size for one woman and a second-hand dog with a crooked tail. The cottage sat near the end of a narrow dirt lane in a quiet part of coastal Maine, the kind of place where neighbors waved even if they did not know your name, and the post office still used a chalkboard to list community events. I planted tomatoes the second week I moved in, big beefsteaks and sweet cherries. The earth here was rich and dark, nothing like the stubborn clay I had fought back in the city. I named the dog Button. He had shown up on my porch one evening, ribs showing, fur matted, eyes full of questions. I made him a bed from an old quilt, fed him a little turkey, and by morning he had decided I was his person. We never discussed it. It just was. Each day began the same. I woke early, fed Button, put on my walking shoes, and strolled the short path down to the beach. The sea was always waiting, sometimes gray and stormy, sometimes blue and soft. Sometimes it gave me sea glass, sometimes it gave me silence. Either way, I took it. I waved to the lobstermen heading out at dawn, said hello to the woman who walked laps around the lighthouse, chatted with the old widower who always wore a Red Sox cap and carried a thermos of lukewarm coffee. They did not know who I used to be. They only knew me as Jane, the woman with the kind dog and the crooked smile, who bought rhubarb at the farmer's market and donated extra tomatoes to the food pantry. It was enough, more than enough. I fixed up the porch with hanging ferns, painted the front door robin's egg blue, installed wind chimes that tinkled like laughter on good days and sang like sorrow on rainy ones. In the evenings I read in the armchair by the window, sometimes fiction, sometimes memoirs, always something that reminded me what it meant to be fully, quietly alive. And once a year, I performed my ritual. Each December, I sat at the table with a hot cup of tea and my address book. 2 names were circled in red ink, my daughter's and my son's. I wrote out Christmas cards for them, simple white cards with gold trim. No photos, no messages, just 7 words, written in my hand. You thought I forgot. I remembered everything, especially you. I signed them with just one letter, J. I mailed them every year without fail. They never responded. I did not expect them to. Some truths do not need acknowledgement to hold their weight. The cards were not for them. They were for me. To remember that I had not lost my mind. To remember that I had not been erased. To remember that the woman they tried to bury beneath paperwork and gaslighted apologies had survived, thrived, grown tomatoes in peace. In the quiet, I made a life worth living. I cooked what I wanted. I danced in my kitchen when the mood struck. I wore soft sweaters and no makeup. I learned to bake sourdough and burn it half the time. I taught Button how to sit, how to fetch, how to nap in perfect contentment. And I never once felt lonely. Because loneliness is not the absence of people, it is the absence of self. And I had finally found mine again. There was no dramatic revenge, no courtroom finale with gasps from the gallery, just a steady unfolding of truth, a quiet reckoning, a gentle, firm hand drawing a line in the sand and saying no more silence when I should be heard, no more guilt for outliving my usefulness, no more pretending that betrayal is love. Now I live in a house by the sea, and when I stand on the porch in the morning, with my coffee and the sunrise, and Button at my feet, I do not miss what was. I honor it, I carry it, and I let it rest. Her name was Alicia. I do not think I will ever forget her face. Clear eyes, steady hands, and the way she said Mrs. Jane like it meant something more than a room number. In the weeks I spent behind locked doors and padded smiles, she was the only one who looked at me without pity, the only one who saw past the slippers and soft voice and knew something sharper still lived beneath my silence. She held my hand on the nights when sleep would not come. She sat with me through blood tests, memory games, and casual assessments, where they smiled at me like I was made of glass. She never once called me sweetie. She never once asked me to try harder to remember. When the truth came out, when the story exploded, and the letters poured in, she brought me tea and said nothing, just sat beside me, like the world had not cracked open and reassembled itself around me. When I rewrote my will, I named her as the beneficiary of the most important part of my legacy, not just the money, not just the land, the mission. I gave her everything, my savings, my cottage, my trust, all to open a new home, a place not just for the elderly, but for the forgotten, for women like me, women whose children stopped calling, women who were once strong and then punished for surviving too long. She called it the Armitage Home. I cried when I saw the plans, wide porches, real kitchens, bookshelves that lined the walls and no locked doors, each room with a name, not a number, each resident with a story, not a chart. Alicia said, "It will be a place where memory is honored, not feared." And I believed her, because when no one else was watching, she still cared, and you cannot fake that. I visit sometimes, not as a patient, as a guest. I read to the residents. I bake cookies that always burn just a little at the edges. I bring Button, who loves the attention more than I do, and sometimes I sit with the women who have been forgotten by their children and whisper to them, "You are not alone. You are not the only one." They nod. They know. In this quiet chapter of my life, I have found something deeper than revenge. I have found restoration. I do not need their apologies anymore. I do not need their names on envelopes or forced smiles at holidays. I do not need their recognition. I only needed one thing: to be remembered. Not as a burden, not as a checkbook, not as a problem to be solved, but as someone who lived, who loved, who knew exactly when to pretend to forget, just long enough to make them remember. So to those of you still listening, still wondering if your silence will ever be enough, if your dignity can ever survive betrayal, let me tell you, it can. And it does, because the truth is not always loud. Sometimes it is just steady. Sometimes it is just patient. And sometimes the most powerful kind of revenge is simply this: to survive with grace, to forgive without letting them back in, to build a life so full, so free, so undeniably yours that they can never claim to have broken you. Revenge has no expiration date, but sometimes forgiveness for yourself is the warmest way to win. Thank you for walking with me through every silence, every betrayal, and every quiet victory. If this story reminded you of something buried in your own past, if you've ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, or disappear quietly into old age, know this: you are still here, and your story still matters. This is Grandma True Stories, where memory is power, silence is strategy, and justice takes its time. If you believe in stories that do not shout, but still leave you speechless, subscribe to this channel. Click the bell so you never miss a truth that refuses to stay buried. Because revenge has no expiration date, and when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens. Subscribe now to Grandma True Stories. Your voice belongs here.